Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time I set up the Battle of Atlanta with the Battle of Bald Hill. This episode dives right into the first attacks during the Battle of Atlanta. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, or purchase something from the Teespring store or Etsy shop. Every little bit helps. Thank you. After the fight on July 20th at Peachtree Creek and at Bald Hill on July 21st, William T. Sherman's Army Group was closing in on the city of Atlanta, and Confederate Army Commander John Bell Hood had just lost more casualties in his attempt to throw back Union forces. Now, Hood would launch one of his boldest tactical maneuvers of the entire war. When the Union captured Bald Hill, they could now enfilade the Confederate outer defensive line. That position became untenable. In the afternoon on July 21st, Hood called together his corps commanders and discussed plans for an attack that, if it worked, might spell disaster for Sherman's armies. He chose his most experienced corps commander, William Hardee, to take his entire corps and march around the left flank of Sherman's army group. Those Union troops were from the Army of the Tennessee under James B. McPherson. Once around the flank, Hardee would push toward Decatur a few miles away. From there, the Confederate corps commander could attack the rear of Sherman's army and send them into confusion. The group broke up and Hardee began pulling his troops out of their entrenchments and moved them through the city. This caused pandemonium in Atlanta. Citizens saw Confederate soldiers leaving the city and heading south and assumed that Hood had decided to give up the city to Sherman. They began to throw their belongings in wagons, onto their horses, or over their shoulders and started to leave the city. The rebel soldiers also didn't know where they were headed and assumed they were evacuating, so many took that opportunity to take items as they left the city, like food and little trinkets that easily could be carried with them. Benjamin Cheatham's corps and Alexander P. Stewart's corps used the darkness to pull their troops from the outer defensive line and occupy the city defensive line. Hardee, a few hours into his movement, could see that his troops were too worn out from 2 days of fighting to accomplish the march through the night that Hood had wanted. He told Hood about this, and Hood called another conference. This time, only Hardee, Cheatham, and Cavalry Commander Joseph Wheeler attended. The original plan would be altered, even though Hood declared later that there was no altering of the original plan. Now, with this new plan, Hardee would simply march his corps to the flank and rear of McPherson's line and launch an attack to roll up Sherman's line. Wheeler would guard Hardee's flank and push on to Decatur. When Hardee had engaged McPherson and began to push the Union flank, Cheatham's corps would emerge from the city's defenses and continue the push, aiding Hardee's corps. Sherman and the other commanders in his army group quickly realized something was going on. Confederate troops were gone from their front, and many believed that Hood was evacuating the city. Some commanders even rode out to the outer defenses and found them empty. Pushing on, they quickly ran into Confederate skirmishers, but the Union general simply believed this was a rear guard protecting the retreating rebels. Sherman began preparing for a movement west and south of Atlanta, anticipating Hood's army would head in that direction, but nothing much could be done until daylight on July 22nd. Hood hoped that Hardee could launch a dawn attack, but the mileage was too great for Hardee to move his entire corps and prepare them to launch such a bold move at such an hour. Morning dawned on July 22, 1864, and Hardee continued to place his corps on the flank of McPherson's army. William B. Bates' division was on the right, then William H. T. Walker's division to their left, followed by Patrick Cleburne's division, with George Maney's division behind Cleburne. In concert with the infantry attack, Joseph Wheeler's cavalry headed northeast of Hardee's position to attack Decatur. Sherman met with McPherson in the late morning, and Sherman wanted McPherson to send Thomas Sweeney's division to Decatur to destroy more of the railroad, but McPherson was afraid of his left flank being attacked and convinced him to allow Sweeney to move to the left, and if no attack came by 1 p.m., then he would send him to Decatur. Sweeney moved to the left flank, and McPherson and Sherman sat down under a tree near Sherman's headquarters, where Sherman laid out a map to explain where George Thomas's Army of the Cumberland was located now since the Confederates had evacuated the outer defenses. Light musketry of skirmishing could be heard near the left flank, and some sounds coming from the direction of Decatur. Both generals pulled out their compasses and checked the direction of the musketry. Then McPherson rode off to shore up his flank. The musketry came from Hardee's skirmishers, preempting the flank attack. The bold Confederate attack ran into problems as it stepped off. Bates' division on the far right was misinformed about a mill pond in their front, which forced 2 of his brigades to sidle to the right to avoid the pond. leaving the brigade of Kentuckians known as the Orphan Brigade to approach the Union flank by itself. On Bates' left, Walker made a weird decision. He noticed an entangled briar patch in front of one of his regiments, and instead of simply making accommodations for the regiment to move around it, he went to his corps commander, Hardee, to ask permission to do it. Hardee lashed out, saying, "No, sir, this movement has been delayed too long already. Go and obey my orders." Walker rode off and commented to a member of his staff, "I shall make him remember this insult. If I survive this battle, he shall answer me for it." Hardee did send Walker an apology, but Walker was fully insulted and wouldn't accept the apology. Walker went out to investigate the ground in front of his troops, who were attempting to maneuver around the same mill pond that threw Bates' men into confusion. As Walker rode out in front of his troops, Union skirmishers unleashed a volley, and one of the bullets hit Walker, killing him instantly. However, there is a dispute as to when Walker was killed. 16th Corps Commander Grenville Dodge, the man who commanded troops that would be attacked by Walker's men, claimed that he witnessed Walker get shot off his horse during the battle near one of his brigades commanded by States Rights Gist, but Dodge had never met Walker to anyone's knowledge, and to spot that one man being killed amidst the smoke and chaos of a battle seems a little far-fetched. Hugh Mercer, an inexperienced officer as far as combat goes, took command of the division in the wake of Walker's death. It was after 12 noon when Hardee's corps made their attack. The first troops to make contact with the enemy was those under Bate, but even though Bate had 3 brigades in his division, the mill pond threw 2 of his brigades into so much confusion that only one brigade, the Orphan Brigade of Kentuckians, attacked. The men from the Bluegrass State rushed against the Federals under Dodge, and the two sides threw lead at one another, with the rebels putting up a good fight, but their battle line was smaller than their Union counterpart, and Dodge moved the 7th Iowa to reinforce the 66th Indiana. Union artillery blew holes in the rebel line, and without support, Bates' lone brigade fell back, utterly defeated. Walker's division, now under Hugh Mercer, made their presence on the field. George A. Smith led his brigade to confront the Federals, who had just thrown back the Orphan Brigade. Smith was new to brigade command, having taken over the brigade 2 days before, after the death of Clement Stevens at Peachtree Creek. He attacked the Union force under brigade commanders August Mercy and John Morrill. Dodge grew concerned over the attacks being launched by Hardee's corps and decided to launch his own attack against the approaching rebels. He ordered the 12th Illinois and the 81st Ohio to attack Smith's brigade. It drove back the right flank, but Smith's left was holding on, still engaging in the heavy musketry of Morrill's men. Dodge then ordered the 27th Ohio and 39th Ohio to attack in their front, sending the rest of Smith's brigade running toward the rear. But there was more Confederates coming. States Rights Gist Brigade swung into line against the Union defenders, and a brutal struggle between the two sides developed as Gist's men tried in vain to dislodge Dodge's men from their position. Soon Mercer's old brigade, now commanded by William Barkaloo, came onto the scene, but by the time that brigade made it to within musketry range, Gist's men were starting to fall back, and it was decided that throwing another brigade into the fray wouldn't yield any successful result, and it pulled back. Amazingly, Dodge's command was able to hold on despite being attacked by 2 Confederate divisions. However, Bates' division only attacked with 1 brigade instead of all 3. More Confederate troops were making their way into the battle, with Patrick Cleburne and George Maney's division engaging with the Federals.